Chapter 1, Story Mindset. Why do conversations sometimes feel dry, lifeless, and forgettable, even when packed with fascinating facts and impressive details? The surprising truth is that data alone, no matter how compelling or important, rarely connects us deeply with others. Instead, we instinctively gravitate toward narratives, toward stories that transform facts into meaningful moments. This chapter explores how a small but essential shift in your conversational approach from mere information exchange to storytelling can create powerful bonds and lasting impressions. Everyday interactions are filled with moments that go flat, even though they're full of potentially engaging material. Consider yesterday's conversations. Were there moments when your listeners nodded politely, eyes glazed, their attention quietly slipping away? These moments are common because human brains aren't wired merely for data. They're wired for stories. Neuroscience reveals that our minds crave narratives because they offer the cause and effect structures we naturally seek. This explains why lists of facts fade rapidly from memory, while stories stick, sometimes forever. Neuroscientist Uri Hassan discovered something remarkable about storytelling. Effective stories create neural coupling, a fascinating synchronization between speaker and listener brain activity. It's as if storyteller and listener temporarily share one mind, fully attuned to the unfolding narrative. This coupling predicts not only how well listeners comprehend what you share, but also the emotional rapport developed through your conversation. In short, stories don't just convey information, they literally connect minds. Social psychologist Robin Dunbar expands on this phenomenon, showing how storytelling triggers the release of endorphins, creating bonds far stronger than superficial chats. Unlike small talk about weather or trivial updates, short personal stories forge genuine emotional connections, enhancing empathy, trust, and likability. But tapping into these benefits requires a shift from treating conversations as opportunities to transfer data toward moments designed intentionally to build connections. If you're skeptical, try a quick experiment. Recall a recent random fact, perhaps something you read online. Now, recall a short story someone shared with you recently. Which did you remember more clearly? Chances are, the narrative effortlessly sticks in your mind, vibrant and emotionally charged, while isolated facts drift away quickly. Understanding this can dramatically change your conversations. Embracing a story mindset means prioritizing connection over data. Notice when you typically default to data dumping, particularly in professional environments or first meetings. What if instead you crafted an intriguing one-sentence hook? The difference can be startling. Suddenly, listeners lean in, eyes alert, intrigued to hear more. It might feel unnatural initially, but practice makes this approach instinctive, shifting every interaction toward deeper human engagement. Crucially, adopting a story mindset isn't about you, it's fundamentally about your listener. The core principle is always viewing your words through the listener's perspective. Constantly ask yourself, what does this mean for them? This question ensures you're always relevant, empathetic, and engaging. By subtly shifting pronouns from I to you immediately pull listeners into your narrative, making them active participants rather than passive recipients. To make this shift manageable, there's a practical tool you'll rely on repeatedly, the 3-beat mini-story. This compact storytelling technique, consisting of a setup, a turn, and a payoff, allows you to infuse any conversation quickly with intrigue and emotional resonance. The setup offers context. The turn introduces a surprising or dramatic twist. The payoff delivers emotional or intellectual satisfaction. This simple structure aligns perfectly with human cognitive processing patterns, ensuring maximum engagement and recall. Imagine yesterday's dull interaction, now revitalized with a 3-line anecdote. A brief setup framing the moment clearly, a surprising turn providing immediate interest, and a satisfying payoff that speaks directly to your listener's experiences or emotions. Instantly, their eyes widen, their posture shifts, and you're no longer just sharing facts, you're building a genuine connection. A simple but concrete detail, added at the right moment, can amplify this impact significantly. Yet, effective storytelling is a balancing act. A common pitfall to avoid is oversharing, revealing personal details that may overwhelm rather than engage your listener. To gauge appropriateness, apply the coffee shop test. Ask yourself if you'd feel comfortable sharing this story loudly enough for strangers nearby to overhear. If not, scale it back, focusing on emotional truth without unnecessary vulnerability. Another pitfall is what can be called the monster monologue syndrome. Great stories rarely require lengthy exposition. Aim to deliver your anecdotes concisely, ideally under 2 minutes. Insert rhetorical questions every 30 seconds to maintain listener involvement. Be alert for subtle cues, glance-aways, or restless shifts that indicate you've gone on too long. Quickly re-engage listeners by pausing and redirecting the narrative back to relevance and immediacy. To practice cultivating this essential story mindset, try a quick connection audit over the next 24 hours. Identify 5 flat interactions you've experienced recently, moments when the conversation fizzled. Now, transform each of these flat moments using the 3-beat structure. Reimagine the dullest exchange with a vivid, brief anecdote, carefully noting changes in listener response. This conscious practice makes you acutely aware of narrative opportunities hidden within everyday exchanges. Another simple yet powerful exercise is the story lens switch. Each day, select a mundane fact and deliberately transform it into a concise narrative with a setup, challenge, and resolution. Share it intentionally with a colleague and observe how their engagement spikes. These experiences help fill your personal story bank, creating a versatile resource of go-to narratives ready for any interaction. The neural coupling drill further reinforces this mindset shift. Record yourself telling a short, 60-second anecdote, then listen closely, marking emotional beats, moments when listener engagement spikes. Refine these critical moments, making each word and detail purposeful. Practicing this drill regularly sharpens your storytelling instincts, ensuring every narrative you share resonates deeply. Developing a story mindset is transformative. It not only enhances the quality and depth of your conversations, but elevates your relationships professionally and personally. You become a communicator people eagerly seek out, drawn naturally by the compelling nature of your interactions. Storytelling mastery starts precisely here, by shifting from raw data to meaningful narrative exchanges. But even this powerful mindset shift is just the beginning. It's not enough merely to recognize the potential in your conversations. You must learn how to capture and harness the everyday experiences that become your most compelling stories. Yet, what if you're overlooking these golden storytelling moments as they pass by unnoticed? The next chapter, Story Mining, reveals exactly how to spot and collect these hidden gems, turning your daily experiences into an endless source of conversational magic. Before we continue, make sure to subscribe to Grow to the Top and activate notifications to receive more self-improvement tips that will supercharge your growth. And make sure to give this video a thumbs up and share it with your friends. It really helps the channel grow. Thank you for your support. Chapter 2, Story Mining. Have you ever found yourself in a conversation where you desperately needed a compelling story, but your mind went completely blank? You knew you had lived through countless interesting moments, yet in that crucial instant, not a single one seemed accessible. This frustrating experience happens to nearly everyone, and it reveals an uncomfortable truth. Having lived an interesting life doesn't automatically make you an interesting conversationalist. The difference between those who always have the perfect story ready and those who don't isn't necessarily about having more remarkable experiences. It's about a systematic approach to capturing and retrieving those experiences when they matter most. This is where the concept of story mining becomes invaluable. Story mining is the deliberate practice of noticing, collecting, and organizing moments from your daily life that have storytelling potential. It transforms the fleeting nature of experience into a renewable resource of conversation gold. But what exactly makes a moment worth capturing? And how do you develop the instinct to recognize these narrative gems as they occur? Memory researcher Daniel Schachter's work provides fascinating insight here. His studies reveal that our brains don't store memories equally. Vivid, emotionally charged events create stronger neural pathways, making them significantly easier to recall later. However, without immediate tagging of these moments, even emotionally rich experiences can fade into the background noise of daily life. This explains why some people seem naturally gifted at storytelling, while others struggle. The naturals aren't necessarily having more interesting experiences. They're simply more attuned to recognizing and mentally bookmarking moments with narrative potential as they happen. The first step in developing this awareness is learning to recognize story triggers in everyday conversation. These triggers often appear as subtle openings, moments when someone's comment, question, or expression invites a relevant anecdote. Pay attention to phrases like, "that reminds me of," or "have you ever experienced?" These are conversational doorways, perfect opportunities to share a well-crafted story. Physical cues are equally important indicators. When someone raises their eyebrows, leans forward slightly, or tilts their head in curiosity, they're signaling receptiveness to a deeper exchange. These micro-expressions are your green light to shift from information sharing to story sharing. Start logging these triggers in real time, mentally noting when these openings appear in conversation. But recognition alone isn't enough. You need a system to capture these moments before they evaporate from memory. This is where the practice of moment tagging becomes essential. One of the most effective approaches is adopting a 1-minute nightly capture ritual. Before sleep, take 60 seconds to jot down the most story-worthy moments from your day. This brief practice creates a remarkable difference in your storytelling repertoire over time. For emotionally rich events, consider using voice notes rather than written text. Voice captures the emotional texture of an experience while it's still fresh, preserving not just what happened, but how it felt. This emotional authenticity becomes invaluable when you later transform these raw materials into engaging narratives. As you collect these moments, develop the habit of labeling them by theme. Is this a humorous anecdote? A moment of unexpected tension? A learning experience? These thematic tags become crucial retrieval cues later, allowing you to quickly access the perfect story for any conversational context. Over time, these collected moments form your personal story bank, a curated collection of experiences ready to be shaped into compelling narratives. But like any collection, it requires organization to remain useful. Implement a simple classification system with 3 categories: keep, maybe, and toss. The keep category contains your strongest material, moments with clear emotional impact, unexpected turns, or valuable insights. The maybe folder holds experiences that might have potential but need further development. The toss category is for captured moments that, upon reflection, lack sufficient narrative interest. Aim for approximately 30% of your collected moments to qualify as keepers. This ratio ensures quality control while maintaining a diverse range of stories. Schedule weekly reviews to assess your growing collection, ensuring your story bank remains fresh and relevant. Effective retrieval is just as important as thorough collection. Develop shortcuts to access your stories quickly during conversations. If using a digital note app, implement a keyword system for rapid searches. Consider color-coding entries based on emotional intensity, allowing you to match your story's emotional tone to the conversation's current mood. Perhaps most importantly, practice creating 10-second mental summaries of your best stories. These condensed versions serve as internal trailers that help you quickly assess whether a particular story fits the current conversational context before launching into the full narrative. The true art of story mining emerges when you transform these raw captured moments into polished narrative gems. This transformation begins with identifying mini-arcs within mundane events. Even seemingly ordinary experiences contain moments of challenge, surprise, or emotional significance. You just need to recognize them. When reviewing your captured moments, mark points of emotional intensity or unexpected turns. These become the dramatic beats around which you'll construct your narrative. Draft tentative hooks for these moments, compelling opening lines that immediately engage listeners and signal that a story worth hearing is about to unfold. Compression is another essential technique for crafting effective conversational stories. Unlike written narratives, which can unfold at a leisurely pace, conversational stories must be concise and impactful. This means ruthlessly eliminating unnecessary chronology. You don't need to start at the absolute beginning. Drop listeners directly into the most engaging part of the experience. The principle of start late, end early serves as an excellent guideline. Begin your story just before the interesting turn of events and conclude it immediately after the emotional or intellectual payoff. This approach maintains narrative tension and respects your listeners' time and attention. Similarly, include only characters essential to your story's point. Every additional person you introduce creates cognitive load for your listeners. By keeping your cast of characters minimal, you ensure your audience remains focused on the story's core message rather than trying to track multiple individuals. As with any skill, story mining comes with potential pitfalls. One common trap is over-collection paralysis, capturing so many moments that you become overwhelmed by the volume. Combat this by limiting yourself to a maximum of 5 entries daily. This constraint forces you to be selective, capturing only the most promising moments. Schedule regular pruning sessions to keep your story bank manageable. Weekly reviews allow you to refine your collection, elevating promising entries and archiving those that no longer resonate. To maintain a healthy flow through your storytelling pipeline, challenge yourself to share at least one story from your collection each day. Another frequent pitfall is capturing the factual skeleton of an experience while neglecting its emotional dimension. Remember that emotions are what make stories memorable and engaging. When logging moments, include specific feeling words that capture your emotional state. Consider implementing a simple 1 to 5 intensity rating to track the emotional impact of different experiences. Periodically, revisit older entries in your story bank, allowing yourself to re-experience the emotions associated with those moments. This practice keeps your storytelling authentic and prevents your narratives from becoming mechanical recitations of events. To begin developing your story mining skills immediately, try this trigger hunt exercise. Tomorrow, log 5 conversational openings where someone signals receptiveness to a story. Respond to at least 2 of these openings with a brief microstory from your emerging collection. Pay close attention to listener reactions, noting which elements of your story elicited the strongest responses. The 1-minute capture exercise further reinforces this practice. Set a timer each night for 60 seconds and rapidly dump all potentially story-worthy moments from your day. Afterward, highlight the top 3 entries for further development. This time constraint prevents overthinking and captures moments while they're still fresh. Finally, implement the tag and toss exercise by sorting yesterday's captures according to your classification system. Apply the 30% keeper rule rigorously, archiving maybe entries for quarterly review. This disciplined approach ensures your story bank remains a high-quality resource rather than a cluttered repository. By developing these story mining habits, you'll never again find yourself at a loss for the perfect anecdote. But capturing stories is only part of the equation. Even the richest collection of experiences falls flat without the right structure to deliver them effectively. What if there were a simple framework that could transform even ordinary moments into captivating narratives? The next chapter reveals the powerful secret that master conversationalists use to ensure their stories always land with maximum impact. Chapter 3: Quick Structures. The clock is ticking. You have less than 2 minutes to make an impression before your listener's attention begins to drift. This isn't just intuition, it's neuroscience. In the fast-paced rhythm of modern conversation, the ability to deliver concise, high-impact narratives has become perhaps the most valuable communication skill you can develop. Have you ever noticed how some people can transform even the most ordinary experiences into captivating stories that leave you hanging on every word? Meanwhile, others struggle to hold attention despite having genuinely fascinating experiences to share. The difference rarely lies in the content itself. Rather, it's found in something far more fundamental: structure. Structure in storytelling isn't about rigid formulas or mechanical delivery. It's about creating a framework that allows your narrative to flow naturally while maintaining maximum impact. Think of it as the invisible architecture that supports your story, guiding listeners through an experience that feels both surprising and inevitable. The most effective conversational stories share a common characteristic. They're brief. Research consistently shows that the sweet spot for anecdotes in natural conversation falls between 30 and 120 seconds. Beyond this window, listener engagement begins to decline rapidly, regardless of content quality. But how do you pack meaningful emotional impact into such a tight time frame? This is where the concept of the three-beat anecdote becomes invaluable. This elegant structure consists of three essential components: setup, turn, and payoff. The setup establishes context quickly, orienting your listener to the situation. The turn introduces an unexpected element, a surprise, challenge, or complication that creates narrative tension. The payoff resolves this tension while delivering emotional or intellectual satisfaction, ideally with direct relevance to your listener. What makes this structure so powerful? Cognitive science provides fascinating insights. Miller's classic research on information processing revealed that humans naturally chunk information into groups of three. We process triads more efficiently than other numerical groupings. Our minds seem wired to find three-part structures particularly satisfying, whether in storytelling, comedy, or persuasive rhetoric. More recent research by Green and Brock, 2000, demonstrated that concise, imagery-rich stories significantly outperformed longer logical arguments in persuasive impact. Their studies showed that narrative transportation, the immersive experience of being carried away by a story, depends less on length than on structural clarity and vivid detail. The 2020 Frontiers Neurocinema study further reinforced these findings, revealing how moments of suspense, similar to the turn in our three-beat structure, literally synchronize brain activity among listeners, dramatically boosting attention and memory formation. This neural entrainment explains why well-structured stories create such powerful shared experiences. You can begin implementing this approach immediately by building a simple three-beat skeleton for your next conversational story. Start by distilling your context into a single clear sentence that orients your listener. Next, identify the most surprising or challenging moment in your experience. This becomes your turning point. Finally, craft a payoff that connects directly to your listener's interests or experiences, creating immediate relevance. The effectiveness of your three-beat structure depends heavily on how you enter and exit the narrative. Master the art of the curiosity hook, an opening line designed to instantly capture attention. Unexpected image openers work particularly well. Imagine standing in complete darkness while 30 strangers silently surround you. This approach immediately creates a visual scene that demands resolution. Alternatively, pose a thought-provoking what-if question that sparks imagination. What would you do if you suddenly found yourself responsible for a decision affecting thousands of people? Such questions invite listeners to mentally engage with your scenario before you've even begun the actual story. Perhaps most powerful is the technique of teasing stakes without spoilers, hinting at consequences while withholding resolution. I never thought a simple misunderstanding could completely transform my professional reputation until last Tuesday. This approach creates immediate narrative tension that compels listeners to stay engaged. While the three-beat structure provides the foundation, the principles of brevity determine how effectively you execute within this framework. Cognitive load balance is essential. You must provide enough information to create engagement without overwhelming your listener's processing capacity. One practical application of this principle is chunking signals in threes throughout your narrative. Group details, descriptions, and developments in sets of three to maximize cognitive efficiency. Use vivid nouns and active verbs rather than adjective-heavy descriptions. Instead of the extremely tall, impressively designed, and remarkably modern building, try the skyscraper towered over the city, reflecting sunlight like a crystal beacon. Eliminate place name clutter that adds little to the emotional impact of your story. Unless the specific location is crucial to understanding or appreciating the narrative, consider using generic descriptions instead. A coffee shop downtown often works better than Starbucks on 5th and Main because it reduces cognitive load while maintaining the essential setting. Sensory compression represents another vital principle for creating high-impact brief narratives. Rather than overwhelming listeners with multiple sensory details, focus on delivering one powerful sensory cue per beat of your story. This targeted approach creates stronger mental images than scattered sensory information. When describing sensory experiences, favor metaphor over adjective piles. Compare, the noise was extremely loud, incredibly jarring, and painfully high-pitched, with the alarm shrieked like a wounded animal. The metaphor creates a more vivid impression while using fewer words. End your narrative with a forward-looking image that extends the emotional impact beyond the story itself. And now, whenever I face uncertainty, I picture that moment. To sharpen your skills in creating concise narratives, experiment with word limit challenges. Take a story you'd normally tell in several minutes and compress it into a 50-word version that retains the essential emotional core. Then push further, crafting a 30-word version that still delivers impact. Finally, distill the essence into a 6-word teaser that captures curiosity. This progressive compression forces you to identify what's truly essential in your narrative. Develop your own hook laboratory by taking a bland opening line and rewriting it 5 different ways. For example, transform "I went to a conference last week" into options like, "Have you ever watched an entire room of professionals suddenly question everything they believe?" Or, "3 days changed my entire perspective on our industry, and it started with a complete stranger's question." Test these variants in actual conversations, noting which versions generate the strongest engagement. Save your highest performing hooks for future use. Even with these techniques, certain pitfalls can undermine your storytelling effectiveness. The info dump relapse occurs when you revert to chronological reporting rather than narrative structure. Combat this tendency by identifying and eliminating needless chronology. Instead of sequential events, first I did X, then Y happened, after that Z. Focus on cause-effect relationships. Because X happened, Y resulted, which led to Z. Pay close attention to listener interjections during your stories. These natural interruptions often indicate areas where your narrative could be tightened or points where additional clarity would be beneficial. Use these responses as real-time feedback to adjust your storytelling approach. Equally important is avoiding the abrupt exit, ending your story without proper closure or transition. Signal your conclusion with phrases that indicate resolution. "So the real insight was," or "what I realized then." Follow this with a question that hands conversational control back to your listener. Have you ever experienced something similar? Watch for the nod and smile confirmation that indicates your story has successfully landed and your transition has been received. To practice these principles, try the word limit story exercise. Draft a 50-word anecdote about a recent experience, then challenge yourself to trim it to just 30 words while preserving the emotional impact. Note which elements you retained and which you discarded. This reveals what you instinctively consider most essential to your narrative. The Hook Lab exercise builds your opening line repertoire. Take a mundane statement about something that happened to you recently and rewrite the opener 5 different ways, experimenting with different hook techniques. Test at least 2 variants in actual conversations and note which generates stronger engagement. Finally, the exit practice exercise helps you develop smooth conclusions. Craft 8 different exit lines that you could use to conclude stories gracefully. Implement these exits in your next few casual conversations and note which ones generate follow-up questions or comments from listeners. These responses indicate which exit strategies most effectively maintain conversational flow. By mastering these quick structures, you'll transform your everyday anecdotes into powerful connection tools that fit seamlessly into natural conversation. But structure alone isn't enough. Even the most perfectly constructed narrative falls flat without a crucial element that separates forgettable stories from unforgettable ones. What is this essential ingredient that makes listeners not just hear your words, but feel them? The next chapter reveals the hidden force that turns well-structured stories into experiences that resonate long after the conversation ends. Chapter 4: Emotional Power. Why do some stories leave us unmoved, while others linger in our minds for days, weeks, or even years? You've likely experienced both: the forgettable anecdote that evaporates from memory almost immediately, and the powerful narrative that resonates deep within you, creating a lasting impression. The difference often has little to do with the events being described, and everything to do with an invisible force that transforms ordinary communication into something extraordinary. This invisible force, the element that separates merely competent stories from truly captivating ones, is emotion. But not just any emotion. The most effective storytellers understand that emotional impact isn't about dramatic intensity or theatrical delivery. It's about creating authentic resonance that connects speaker and listener on a neurological level. When we examine the science behind emotional storytelling, the findings are remarkable. Neuroeconomist Paul Zach's groundbreaking research revealed that emotionally engaging narratives trigger the release of oxytocin, often called the trust hormone, in listeners' brains. In his 2015 study, participants who watched an emotionally charged narrative showed a 47% increase in oxytocin levels compared to those who viewed emotionally neutral content. More significantly, these viewers were 56% more likely to donate to a charity associated with the narrative's theme. This neurochemical response explains why emotional stories don't just entertain us. They literally change our brain chemistry, making us more empathetic, trusting, and generous. But harnessing this power requires finesse. Too little emotional content leaves listeners disconnected. Too much can make them uncomfortable or skeptical. The concept of selective vulnerability, popularized by researcher Brené Brown, provides valuable guidance here. Brown's work demonstrates that effective vulnerability isn't about indiscriminate self-disclosure, but rather about strategically sharing emotional experiences appropriate to the context and relationship stage. Van Cleef's 2022 research supports this approach, showing that moderate self-disclosure significantly increases perceived warmth without diminishing perceptions of professional competence. So how do you apply these insights to your everyday conversations? The first step is mastering selective vulnerability, the art of revealing enough to create connection without crossing into oversharing. Begin by gauging the appropriate depth based on your relationship with the listener. A story you might share with a close friend will differ substantially from one you'd tell a new acquaintance or professional contact. A practical tool for assessing appropriateness is the coffee shop test. Would you feel comfortable sharing this story loudly enough for nearby strangers to overhear? If the thought makes you cringe, you're likely venturing into oversharing territory. Scale back to an emotional level that feels natural in a semi-public setting. When sharing emotional content, convert raw feelings into listener-oriented framing. Instead of simply describing your emotions, connect them to universal experiences. I felt that particular kind of nervousness, where your mind races through every possible worst-case scenario. You know that feeling? This approach invites listeners to access their own emotional memories, creating deeper engagement. Humor represents another powerful emotional lever that can transform your storytelling. Strategic humor doesn't require you to be naturally funny. It simply means inserting light moments that release tension and create shared pleasure. Try incorporating one unexpected sensory detail that brings a smile. The room was so quiet you could hear someone's stomach growling, which of course had to be mine. Particularly effective is breaking tension at the turn beat of your three-beat structure. This creates an emotional rhythm that mirrors natural human experience, tension followed by relief. End humorous segments with a shared chuckle rather than a forced punchline. The goal isn't to generate uproarious laughter, but to create moments of connection through shared amusement. The core principles of emotional storytelling center around creating what Zach calls the oxytocin and trust loop, a virtuous cycle where emotional sharing builds trust, which enables deeper emotional connection. To initiate this loop, identify specific empathy triggers within your experiences, moments of struggle, surprise, or triumph that naturally evoke emotional responses. Rather than trying to pack multiple emotions into a single story, anchor your narrative on one medium-intensity emotion. This focused approach creates clearer emotional resonance than attempting to take listeners on a complex emotional journey. As you share, subtly mirror your listeners' facial expressions to reinforce trust and connection. This mirroring happens naturally in engaged conversations, but can be consciously enhanced for greater impact. Another fundamental principle is finding the universal within the personal. Every effective story balances unique details with universal emotions. Spotlight relatable motives that transcend specific circumstances. Basic human drives like the fear of rejection, hope for recognition, desire for connection, or need for security. These emotional touchpoints create bridges between vastly different life experiences. Strip away niche jargon or insider references that might create distance between you and your listener. Close your narrative with a shared takeaway that emphasizes common ground. I guess we all sometimes need a reminder that our initial assumptions can be completely wrong. This universal framing transforms your personal experience into a shared human insight. The tactical toolkit for emotional storytelling includes specific narrative structures designed to maximize emotional impact. The failure to learning arc represents one of the most versatile and effective approaches. Begin with an honest misstep or mistake. This immediate vulnerability creates connection and interest. Show the pivot moment when realization or change began, then land on a lesson that directly serves your listener. This structure works because it combines vulnerability, admitting failure, with generosity, sharing the resulting wisdom. It transforms potentially negative experiences into valuable insights, modeling both humility and growth. The structure feels authentic because it mirrors how we naturally process and make meaning from our challenges. The empathy bridge technique offers another powerful tool for emotional connection. Begin with a question that invites shared emotional recognition. You know that feeling when you're absolutely certain about something and then discover you've been completely wrong? Pause briefly to allow your listener to access their own emotional memory. Watch for the nod or verbal affirmation that signals recognition. Then, resume your story with a sensory callback that anchors the shared emotion in your specific experience. Despite these techniques, certain pitfalls can undermine your emotional storytelling effectiveness. The TMI dump occurs when you share more intimate details than the relationship or context warrants. Watch for oversharing signals like averted eyes, increased physical distance, or sudden interest in phone screens. When you notice these cues, trim private details while maintaining the emotional core of your story. In situations where you're uncertain about appropriate disclosure levels, offer an opt-out. This gets a bit personal. Stop me if it's too much. This simple courtesy acknowledges boundaries and gives listeners control over the interaction, increasing trust rather than diminishing it. Equally problematic is forced drama, exaggerating emotional elements beyond credibility. Listeners have finely tuned authenticity detectors and quickly disengage from stories that feel manipulative or overblown. If you're unsure whether your recollection might be dramatized, check facts with someone who witnessed the event. When in doubt, let humor gently undercut potential melodrama. In my mind, it was a complete disaster, though looking back, it was probably just mildly awkward. To develop your emotional storytelling skills, try the emotion map exercise. Select a recent experience and chart its emotional intensity throughout, noting where feelings peaked and valleys where tension released. This mapping helps identify the natural emotional rhythm of your experiences, revealing the most powerful moments to emphasize in your storytelling. The failure flip exercise builds your comfort with vulnerability. Draft a 3-beat anecdote about a minor mistake or embarrassing moment, focusing on the learning or insight that resulted. Practice delivering this story with authentic emotion rather than self-deprecation or bravado. Finally, the humor injection exercise helps lighten emotional intensity. Take yesterday's most serious story and add one playful analogy or unexpected observation. This practice develops your ability to modulate emotional tone, preventing stories from becoming too heavy or one-dimensional. By mastering emotional power in your storytelling, you create experiences that resonate far beyond the moment of telling. Your stories become vehicles for genuine human connection, triggering neurochemical responses that build trust, empathy, and lasting bonds. But even the most emotionally resonant story can fall flat if delivered as a monologue rather than a dialogue. What if the most powerful element of storytelling isn't what you say, but what you hear? The next chapter reveals the surprising secret that transforms one-way narratives into dynamic exchanges that deepen relationships exponentially. Chapter 5: Listening Loop. What if the most powerful storytelling technique isn't about speaking at all? Imagine discovering that the secret to becoming a captivating conversationalist has less to do with what you say and more to do with something else entirely, something that happens in the spaces between your words, in the moments when you're not speaking. Most people approach conversation as a series of solo performances, taking turns delivering monologues while the other person waits for their chance to speak. They focus intensely on crafting their next statement, often at the expense of truly hearing what's being shared. This common pattern creates a fundamental disconnect, a missed opportunity for genuine connection. The most magnetic conversationalists understand something that others miss. True dialogue isn't a tennis match of alternating speeches, but rather a collaborative dance. And the element that transforms this dance from awkward shuffling to fluid grace is something we rarely associate with storytelling prowess: listening. Not just any listening, but a specific approach that creates what communication experts call the listening loop, a dynamic exchange where attentive listening fuels better storytelling, which in turn invites deeper listening. This virtuous cycle exponentially increases connection quality while making conversations feel effortless and engaging for everyone involved. Research confirms the remarkable power of this approach. A comprehensive meta-analysis of communication studies revealed that active listening techniques, specifically paraphrasing what you've heard, asking thoughtful questions, and acknowledging emotions, significantly boost relational satisfaction across contexts. Weger's groundbreaking 2014 study demonstrated that active listening responses raised partner trustworthiness ratings by an astonishing 40% compared to passive listening or dismissive responses. Even more compelling, Itchikoff and Kluger's 2017 research showed that high-quality listening reduced speaker anxiety in difficult conversations by 23%. This finding explains why people instinctively seek out good listeners when navigating challenging situations or processing complex emotions. The presence of an attentive listener literally calms our nervous system, creating psychological safety that enables more authentic sharing. You can begin harnessing this power immediately through what communication experts call the echo technique. Before responding to something someone has shared, briefly paraphrase one specific detail they mentioned. So, you were surprised by their reaction to the proposal. This simple acknowledgement signals that you've truly heard them, creating an immediate sense of validation. Follow this with emotional recognition. That sounds incredibly frustrating, or I can imagine how exciting that must have been. This validation of feelings, even when briefly expressed, creates a powerful connection. Watch what happens next. Their posture visibly relaxes, their expression opens, and the conversation deepens naturally. This subtle shift in body language confirms that the listening loop has been activated. The question pause represents another powerful technique that yields immediate results. Instead of waiting until someone finishes speaking to respond, insert a thoughtful, clarifying question mid-story. What was going through your mind at that moment? Or how did others in the room react? This interruption, counterintuitively, doesn't disrupt their narrative flow, it enhances it. Notice the surge in eye contact that follows your question. This increased engagement happens because your question signals genuine interest rather than mere politeness. Even more valuable, These mid-story questions often reveal new angles and dimensions to their experience that they might not have otherwise shared. These fresh perspectives become fuel for deeper conversation. The core principles that make the listening loop effective begin with understanding turn-taking rhythm. Most people speak too long before allowing others to respond, creating imbalance that diminishes engagement. Aim for a maximum of 60 seconds before creating a natural handover moment. Use rising intonation as a subtle cue that you're ready to pass the conversational baton, and pay attention to your listener's nodding speed. Matching this rhythm creates unconscious rapport. When responding to others' stories, implement the story mirror technique. Instead of matching topic for topic, your story about work reminds me of my work experience. Respond with parallel emotion regardless of context. That feeling of being underestimated resonates with me. I felt something similar when. This emotional mirroring creates deeper connection than superficial topic matching. Keep your mirrored story concise, under 90 seconds, to maintain balanced exchange. End with an open prompt that returns focus to their experience. How did you feel after that happened? Or, what did you learn from that situation? This approach transforms conversation from parallel monologues into genuine dialogue. The tactical toolkit for mastering the listening loop includes developing what communication experts call seed spotting, the ability to recognize potential story openings in others' casual comments. Listen for phrases like, "You won't believe what happened," or "I had the strangest experience." These are invitations to deeper sharing that many people miss. When you hear these seeds, mentally note them or jot them in a notebook icon if appropriate. Later in the conversation, you can resurface these seeds at relevant moments. Earlier, you mentioned something about a challenging client situation. I'd love to hear more about that if you're willing to share. This callback demonstrates that you've been genuinely listening, creating immediate trust and opening space for deeper exchange. Perhaps counterintuitively, silence represents one of your most powerful listening tools. After someone shares something significant, practice holding a 3-second pause before responding. This brief silence creates space for the speaker to add depth or nuance to their story. Most people rush to fill conversational gaps, but skilled listeners understand that comfortable silence often elicits the most meaningful disclosures. As the speaker fills this silence with deeper detail, nod slowly to signal your comfort with the extended sharing. This unhurried acknowledgement communicates that you're fully present and interested in what they're saying, not simply waiting for your turn to speak. Despite understanding these techniques, certain pitfalls can undermine your effectiveness in creating the listening loop. Story hijacking, jumping in too quickly with your own experience, represents one of the most common mistakes. When you feel the impulse to interject, use the buffer phrase, "Tell me more," to create space for additional sharing before offering your perspective. A simple practice that prevents hijacking is mentally counting to 2 after the other person stops speaking before you begin your response. This brief pause ensures they've fully completed their thought and signals respectful consideration of what they've shared. The advice reflex presents another common pitfall. When someone shares a challenge or problem, most people immediately offer solutions or directives. While well-intentioned, this response often feels dismissive of the emotional component of their experience. Instead, replace immediate advice with a reflective summary. It sounds like you're feeling caught between competing priorities. If you do have potentially valuable input, ask permission before offering it. I had a similar experience once. Would it be helpful to hear what worked for me? This simple question respects their agency and prevents unwanted advice. When sharing your perspective, offer a story-based example rather than a directive. Here's what happened when I tried a different approach. This narrative framing feels collaborative rather than prescriptive. To develop your listening loop skills, try the echo drill in your next conversation. Choose one specific detail from what someone shares and paraphrase it before responding. Notice how this small acknowledgement changes the quality of their subsequent sharing and your connection. The story mirror exercise builds your ability to respond with emotional resonance. When someone shares an experience, respond with a brief anecdote that mirrors the emotional tone of their story, regardless of whether the circumstances are similar. Focus on keeping your response under 90 seconds and ending with an open question that returns focus to their experience. Finally, the question pause exercise develops your ability to deepen conversations through thoughtful inquiry. In your next extended conversation, insert at least one clarifying question mid-story rather than waiting until the end. Notice how this changes the depth and direction of what's shared. By mastering the listening loop, you transform storytelling from a solo performance into a collaborative creation. Your conversations become richer, more engaging, and more memorable for everyone involved. The listening loop doesn't just improve your storytelling, it fundamentally changes how people experience interacting with you. Yet even with perfect structure, emotional resonance, and attentive listening, your stories may still fall short of their full potential if you overlook a crucial dimension of communication. Beyond your words lies an entire language that can either amplify or undermine your message. What is this hidden language that speaks louder than words, and how can you harness it to transform good stories into unforgettable experiences? The next chapter reveals the invisible force that determines whether your audience merely hears your story or truly feels it. Chapter 6: Dynamic Delivery. Have you ever witnessed someone tell what should have been a fascinating story, yet somehow the experience fell completely flat? The content was compelling, the structure sound, but something essential was missing. Something that exists beyond words, yet profoundly shapes how those words are received. Conversely, you've likely encountered people who could describe the most ordinary experience and leave you hanging on every syllable, completely captivated. What creates this stark difference? What invisible force determines whether your carefully crafted stories soar or stumble? The answer lies not just in what you say, but in how you say it, the subtle yet powerful realm of delivery. But dynamic delivery encompasses far more than simply speaking clearly or making occasional gestures. It involves a sophisticated orchestration of multiple communication channels working in harmony to create an immersive experience for your listener. The science behind effective delivery reveals something surprising. Your words themselves, the content you've so carefully crafted, account for only a fraction of your message's impact. Research consistently shows that nonverbal elements carry the majority of emotional weight in face-to-face communication. Your tone, pacing, facial expressions, and body language collectively create a meta-message that can either reinforce or completely undermine your verbal content. Even more fascinating is the concept of entrainment, the synchronization of movement and speech patterns between conversational partners. Abney's groundbreaking 2014 research demonstrated that gesture-speech synchrony directly predicted perceived likability in conversational dyads. When a speaker's gestures aligned precisely with their speech rhythms, listeners reported significantly higher connection and engagement. Similarly, Cohen-Priva's 2017 study revealed that speech rate convergence, the tendency of conversational partners to match each other's pace, strongly correlated with positive social outcomes. When speakers unconsciously adjusted their tempo to match their listeners, both parties reported greater satisfaction with the interaction and stronger feelings of rapport. These findings explain why even the most perfectly structured story can fall flat if delivered without attention to these dynamic elements. Fortunately, you can begin enhancing your delivery immediately with simple adjustments that yield powerful results. The speed mirror technique represents one of the most accessible and effective approaches. Begin by matching your listener's approximate words per minute rate for the first 2 minutes of conversation. This subtle mirroring creates unconscious comfort and rapport. Then, when you reach the climactic moment of your story, shift to a pace approximately 5% slower than your baseline. This slight deceleration signals importance and creates natural emphasis without seeming artificial. Watch for relaxation signals that indicate successful entrainment. slightly dilated pupils, deeper breathing, and reduced muscle tension around the eyes and mouth. These physiological responses confirm that your listener is fully engaged and receptive to your message. Another immediate improvement comes through deliberate gesture rehearsal. Many people adopt a static stance when sharing stories, missing the opportunity to enhance their narrative through purposeful movement. Replace rigid posture with one illustrative motion that visually reinforces your story's key moment. Anchor this gesture precisely to your narrative peak, the emotional high point or crucial revelation. For maximum impact, film yourself practicing this motion, then review and refine until it feels natural rather than choreographed. This brief preparation transforms your physical presence from a potential distraction into a powerful communication asset. The core principles of dynamic delivery begin with vocal variety, the strategic modulation of your speaking voice to create emphasis and maintain engagement. Start by identifying key nouns in your story and slightly raising your pitch when you speak them. This subtle emphasis guides your listener's attention to essential elements without seeming artificial or theatrical. Insert micropauses, brief moments of silence lasting less than a second, immediately before revealing surprising information or important insights. These tiny gaps create natural suspense that heightens impact. When concluding important points, end your sentences with a downward inflection rather than upward. This descending tone signals confidence and authority, while upward inflections can inadvertently communicate uncertainty. Body alignment represents another crucial element of dynamic delivery. During emotionally significant moments in your story, turn your torso directly toward your listener rather than standing at an angle. This frontal orientation signals openness and importance, inviting deeper connection. Subtly mirror your listener's head tilt to enhance unconscious rapport, and keep your hands visible, preferably above waist level, to communicate openness and honesty. The tactical toolkit for dynamic delivery includes cultural attunement, adapting your nonverbal communication to respect diverse contexts and audiences. Before sharing stories in unfamiliar cultural settings, research local gesture taboos that might inadvertently cause offense. Hand movements considered perfectly innocent in one culture may carry unintended meanings in another. Replace culture-specific slang or references with universal imagery that transcends geographic and cultural boundaries. When possible, ask a native peer to sanity check your story for potential misunderstandings or unintended implications. This cultural sensitivity prevents disconnection and demonstrates respect for your listeners' backgrounds. The you-focus framing technique further enhances delivery by centering your story around listener relevance rather than speaker experience. Begin by explicitly stating what's at stake for your listener. This might change how you approach challenging conversations with colleagues. Use second-person pronouns strategically throughout your narrative to maintain this connection, and close by, directly linking the benefit or insight from your story to their specific context or challenges. Despite understanding these principles, certain pitfalls can undermine your delivery effectiveness. Overanimation, excessive or distracting movement, represents a common mistake. Hands moving frequently above shoulder height pull attention away from your message and toward your movements. Instead, anchor gestures to one significant beat in your story, practicing restraint during other moments. Practice in front of a mirror to identify and eliminate distracting mannerisms that might emerge unconsciously during animated storytelling. This self-observation helps develop the physical discipline that characterizes polished communicators. Equally problematic is monotone drift, the tendency to flatten vocal variety during extended speaking. This pattern occurs naturally as we focus on content rather than delivery, but it significantly reduces listener engagement. Record a 60-second snippet of your natural storytelling and analyze your pitch range. If you notice limited variation, deliberately insert stress on action verbs to create natural modulation. Before important conversations, visualize your voice following a wave pattern rather than a flat line. This mental image naturally encourages the vocal variety that maintains listener attention and communicates authentic engagement with your material. To develop your dynamic delivery skills, try the speed mirror exercise in your next conversation. Consciously match your listener's pace for several minutes, then subtly slow down during an important point. Note how this shift affects their attention and responsiveness. This simple adjustment often creates an immediate improvement in connection quality. The gesture rehearsal exercise builds your physical expressiveness. Identify one static pose you typically adopt when speaking, then replace it with a single, meaningful motion that illustrates a key concept. Practice this movement until it feels natural rather than performative. This deliberate physicality transforms your presence from static to dynamic without crossing into distracting territory. Finally, the cultural lens exercise expands your delivery adaptability. Take a favorite anecdote and rewrite it without any culture-specific references, slang, or idioms. This practice develops your ability to communicate effectively across diverse contexts, ensuring your stories resonate regardless of your audience's background. By mastering dynamic delivery, you transform your stories from mere words into multisensory experiences that engage listeners completely. Your narratives become not just heard, but felt, creating connections that transcend the limitations of verbal communication alone. The synchronization of your verbal and nonverbal channels creates a harmony that resonates deeply with listeners, making your stories not just interesting, but truly unforgettable. Yet even with perfect structure, emotional resonance, attentive listening, and dynamic delivery, your stories may still fall short of their ultimate potential in certain contexts. There's a dimension of storytelling that becomes particularly crucial when the stakes are highest, when you need not just to connect, but to influence, persuade, or shift entrenched perspectives. What is this elusive quality that transforms engaging stories into instruments of genuine influence? The next chapter reveals the missing element that allows your narratives to change not just how people feel, but what they believe and how they act. Chapter 7. Narrative Influence. Why do some ideas spread like wildfire, while others, even brilliant ones, struggle to gain traction? What makes certain presentations instantly compelling, while others, despite containing valuable information, leave audiences unmoved and unchanged? The answer lies in a subtle yet powerful dimension of communication that transcends mere information exchange. In professional environments, we often assume that logical arguments and solid data are sufficient to persuade others. We present our carefully researched facts, outline our reasoning, and expect rational minds to naturally follow our conclusions. Yet time and again, this approach falls short. Even the most meticulously constructed logical arguments frequently fail to shift perspectives or inspire action. This persistent gap between information and influence reveals something fundamental about human decision-making. We like to think of ourselves as primarily rational beings, but neuroscience tells a different story. Our brains are wired not just for logic, but for meaning, and meaning comes packaged most effectively in narrative form. This insight explains why the most influential communicators in any field, from business leaders to political figures to scientific innovators, rely on something more powerful than mere facts. They harness what communication researchers call narrative influence, the strategic use of story structures to shape perception, open minds to new possibilities, and inspire meaningful action. The science behind narrative influence is compelling. Escala's groundbreaking 2007 research demonstrated that brand stories changed consumer attitudes 34% more effectively than factual advertisements containing identical information. More recently, MNTN Research 2022 found that story-driven marketing content boosted conversion rates by up to 30% compared to feature-focused approaches. These findings aren't limited to consumer contexts. They reflect a deeper truth about human cognition. We process, remember, and act upon narrative information more readily than abstract data. Stories create what psychologists call narrative transportation, a state where listeners become so immersed in a narrative that their mental barriers to new ideas temporarily lower, creating openness to perspective shifts that logical arguments alone rarely achieve. You can begin applying narrative influence immediately through what communication experts call the data-to-story technique. Instead of presenting raw metrics or statistics, identify the human impact behind each number. Who is affected? What changed in their experience? How does this data point reflect real-world consequences? Once you've identified this human dimension, wrap your statistic in a 3-sentence anecdote that brings the numbers to life. For example, rather than simply stating, project completion time decreased by 23%, you might say, the team faced seemingly impossible deadlines every quarter. After implementing the new workflow system, they completed the same projects with nearly a quarter of the time to spare. Now, team members report significantly lower stress levels while maintaining quality standards. End this mini-narrative with a question that links directly to action. How might similar efficiency gains impact your team's current challenges? This question-based transition moves naturally from story to practical application without feeling manipulative or sales-oriented. Another powerful application of narrative influence is the shared quest framing technique, particularly valuable in negotiations or situations with potential conflict. Instead of positioning discussions as competitions where one side must win, reframe the interaction as a shared journey toward mutual benefit. Begin by defining an obstacle that affects both parties, a common challenge, external threat, or shared opportunity. Cast all participants as allies facing this challenge together rather than opponents with competing interests. Finally, outline a resolution path that delivers meaningful wins for everyone involved. This narrative structure transforms potentially adversarial interactions into collaborative problem-solving, reducing defensive reactions and opening space for creative solutions. The core principles that make narrative influence effective begin with analogical transfer, using familiar scenarios to explain complex or novel concepts. When introducing challenging ideas, choose an analogy from a domain your listener already understands well. This creates an immediate sense of comprehension and comfort, reducing resistance to unfamiliar concepts. Keep your analogy concise, under 30 seconds, to maintain engagement without distracting from your main point. After delivering the analogy, explicitly bridge back to your core idea. Similarly, our current situation. This clear connection ensures your analogy serves as a clarifying tool rather than an interesting but ultimately distracting tangent. Credibility signals represent another essential principle of narrative influence. Brief credential mentions, limited to 10 words or fewer, establish your authority without seeming boastful. Reference third-party evidence sparingly, using it to support rather than replace your narrative. Throughout your communication, maintain a conversational tone rather than slipping into technical jargon or formal presentation mode, even in professional contexts. The tactical toolkit for narrative influence includes the value spotlight technique, particularly effective when you need to communicate core principles or organizational values without sounding preachy. Draft a 60-second anecdote that demonstrates a key value in action rather than simply stating it. Test this story on a trusted peer for clarity and emotional impact, then refine the sensory details to create vivid mental images. For high-stakes meetings or negotiations, the negotiation reframe technique transforms standard agendas into engaging narratives. Storyboard your meeting as a quest map, with each agenda item representing a chapter in a shared journey. Use evocative chapter titles for each discussion point rather than generic headings. Close with a future vision scene that helps participants visualize the positive outcome of successful collaboration. Despite understanding these techniques, certain pitfalls can undermine your narrative influence. Overselling, using excessive superlatives or making grandiose claims, triggers skepticism and resistance. Replace vague praise, revolutionary, game-changing, with specific concrete details that allow listeners to draw their own conclusions about significance. End persuasive stories with a clear, direct ask rather than additional self-promotion. When possible, incorporate brief testimonials from others rather than relying solely on self-assessment. This third-party perspective carries greater credibility and avoids the appearance of egotism. The data dump represents another common pitfall, overwhelming listeners with too many statistics or technical details. Limit yourself to a maximum of 3 numbers per story, ensuring each has clear relevance and impact. For your most important statistic, create a visual image that makes the number memorable. That's enough savings to fund our entire innovation department for a year. Pause periodically for comprehension checks, watching for subtle signs of confusion or disengagement. These brief pauses allow listeners to process information and give you valuable feedback about when to elaborate or move forward. To develop your narrative influence skills, try the data humanization exercise. Select one important statistic from your current work and wrap it in a brief human vignette that illustrates its real-world impact. Practice delivering this story-based explanation rather than simply stating the number, noting how the narrative approach creates greater engagement and retention. The value spotlight exercise builds your ability to communicate principles effectively. Identify a core professional value that matters deeply to you, then craft a micro story that demonstrates this value in action rather than merely stating it. Focus on creating a specific scenario with concrete details rather than abstract descriptions. Finally, the negotiation reframe exercise transforms potentially adversarial interactions into collaborative experiences. Before your next important meeting or negotiation, draft a shared quest narrative that positions all participants as allies facing a common challenge. Identify the mutual obstacle, the combined strengths you bring to addressing it, and the shared benefits of successful resolution. By mastering narrative influence, you transform your ability to shape perceptions, open minds to new possibilities, and inspire meaningful action. Your ideas gain traction not because you've forced them upon others, but because you've created an environment where those ideas can be truly seen, understood, and embraced. Your stories become vehicles not just for connection, but for genuine transformation in perspectives, decisions, and ultimately actions. Yet even as you develop these powerful narrative techniques, a crucial question emerges. Where is the line between influence and manipulation? How do you ensure your growing storytelling abilities serve genuine connection rather than self-interest? What guardrails protect both you and your listeners from the potential misuse of these powerful tools? The next chapter explores the hidden dimension of storytelling that separates authentic communicators from mere persuaders, a dimension that ultimately determines whether your narrative influence creates lasting trust or inevitable backlash. Chapter 8, Ethical Guardrails. With great power comes great responsibility. As you develop your storytelling abilities, you gain increasing influence over how others think, feel, and act. This growing influence raises an important question that many communicators never pause to consider. Where is the line between effective storytelling and manipulation? Between sharing experiences authentically and exploiting others' stories for personal gain? These questions aren't merely philosophical, they have practical implications for your relationships, reputation, and long-term effectiveness as a communicator. The most skilled storytellers understand something that others miss. Storytelling isn't just a technique for achieving immediate goals. It's a trust-building practice that either strengthens or erodes your credibility over time. This chapter explores the often overlooked dimension of storytelling that ultimately determines whether your narrative abilities create lasting positive impact or trigger damaging backlash. It's a dimension that many communicators discover only after crossing invisible boundaries and experiencing the consequences, damaged relationships, lost opportunities, or diminished influence. The concept of ethical guardrails might initially seem restrictive, a set of limitations on your storytelling freedom. But research reveals something surprising. Ethical boundaries don't constrain effective communication. They enable it. Voigt's comprehensive 2021 study demonstrated that communication approaches using dark pattern manipulations, misleading framing, selective disclosure, emotional exploitation initially appeared effective, but ultimately raised audience annoyance and significantly lowered trust compared to more transparent approaches. Similarly, Lee's 2023 meta-analysis revealed that narrative appeals misaligned with cultural values and sensitivities underperformed by approximately 15%, in both persuasion effectiveness and audience liking. These findings confirm what ethical communicators have long understood. Manipulative or insensitive storytelling might occasionally yield short-term results, but it inevitably undermines long-term influence and connection. You can begin implementing ethical guardrails immediately through simple checks that take seconds but prevent potentially serious missteps. The consent checklist represents one such approach. Before sharing a story involving others, ask yourself a simple question. Would the people in this story mind if they heard me telling it? This quick mental check helps you identify potential privacy concerns before they become problems. For stories containing sensitive details or potentially embarrassing moments, secure explicit permission rather than assuming consent. When appropriate, offer anonymity by changing names or identifying details. These small courtesies demonstrate respect for others' privacy and agency, building rather than eroding trust. The intent scan provides another immediate ethical check. Before sharing a story, identify your primary motive. Are you telling this to help, entertain, persuade, or achieve some other purpose? When stakes are high or your story might influence important decisions, explicitly disclose your motive rather than disguising it. If you recognize that your motive is purely self-serving with no benefit to listeners, consider adjusting your story or choosing a different narrative altogether. The core principles of ethical storytelling begin with privacy respect, recognizing that stories involving others carry implicit responsibilities. Minimize identifying markers when sharing experiences that aren't exclusively your own. Where necessary, create composite characters that capture essential truths without exposing specific individuals. Keep vulnerable parties, particularly children, clients, patients, or others in dependent positions, off stage in your narratives unless you have explicit permission to include them. Cultural sensitivity represents another fundamental principle of ethical storytelling. Before sharing stories in unfamiliar cultural contexts, research local norms and taboos that might affect how your narrative is received. Remove idioms or references that might confuse or offend across cultural boundaries. When sharing context-bound experiences, add brief explanatory bridges that help listeners from different backgrounds understand essential context without feeling excluded. The tactical toolkit for ethical storytelling includes the Audience Consent Matrix, a practical framework for determining appropriate sharing boundaries. This simple grid plots stories along two dimensions: public versus private content and low versus high sensitivity. Stories containing public information with low sensitivity, like widely known workplace procedures, require minimal ethical consideration. Conversely, stories with private information and high sensitivity, such as personal struggles or confidential situations, demand the highest level of ethical care. Before sharing any story, mentally plot it on this grid and adjust your delivery channel accordingly. High-sensitivity stories might be appropriate in one-on-one conversations with trusted individuals, but problematic in group settings or social media contexts. This simple matrix prevents the common mistake of sharing the right story in the wrong context. Anonymization hacks provide practical techniques for sharing valuable experiences while protecting privacy. When changing details to protect identities, swap job titles rather than gender, as gender often affects how experiences are perceived and processed. Change specific location details to more general references, city names to regions, for example. For particularly sensitive situations, consider telling the story from first-person plural perspective. We encountered a challenge. Rather than identifying specific individuals, diffusing identity while preserving the essential narrative. Despite understanding these principles, certain pitfalls can undermine your ethical storytelling practice. Story stealing. Using others' experiences without attribution represents one of the most common ethical missteps. This occurs not just when taking someone's complete narrative, but also when borrowing their unique phrasing, insights, or punchlines without acknowledgement. Always cite the original teller when sharing stories you've heard from others, or ask permission before incorporating their experiences into your own narratives. When building on someone else's story, offer your unique perspective or insight rather than simply repeating their content. This approach respects others' narrative contributions while adding genuine value. Manipulative framing presents another significant ethical pitfall. This occurs when you exaggerate stakes or consequences to coerce action, present selective facts that create a misleading impression, or exploit emotional vulnerabilities to bypass rational consideration. Instead, present full context that allows listeners to draw their own conclusions and explicitly invite critical questions rather than attempting to prevent scrutiny. To develop your ethical storytelling skills, try the consent checklist exercise. Before sharing your next few stories, run through 4 quick questions. Would the people involved approve of this sharing? Am I respecting privacy appropriately? Is my motive transparent? Does this story honor rather than exploit the experiences involved? This brief reflection prevents most common ethical missteps. The cultural swap exercise builds your sensitivity to diverse perspectives. Take a story you frequently tell and reimagine it for an audience from a completely different cultural background. What elements might require explanation? What references might create confusion or offense? What adjustments would make your story more universally accessible without losing its essential truth? Finally, the intent scan exercise develops your awareness of storytelling motives. For one day, briefly note your primary purpose before sharing any anecdote or story. This simple practice increases your consciousness of why you're sharing specific narratives and helps you align your storytelling choices with your deeper values and intentions. By implementing these ethical guardrails, you transform your storytelling from a mere persuasion technique into a practice that builds lasting trust and genuine connection. Your narratives become not just effective, but worthy of the influence they wield. You develop a reputation not just for engaging communication, but for communication that respects boundaries, honors diverse perspectives, and creates value for everyone involved. The ethical dimension of storytelling isn't about limiting your impact. It's about ensuring that your impact aligns with your highest intentions. It transforms storytelling from a tool you occasionally use into an integral expression of who you are and how you move through the world. Yet even with perfect structure, emotional resonance, attentive listening, dynamic delivery, strategic influence, and ethical integrity, your storytelling journey isn't complete. There's a dimension of narrative mastery that separates casual practitioners from true experts, a dimension that transforms storytelling from an occasional skill into a defining characteristic of how you communicate in every context. What is this final element that integrates all previous aspects into a cohesive, sustainable practice? The next chapter reveals the missing piece that turns storytelling techniques into a lifelong capability that continuously evolves and expands your communicative power. Chapter 9, Continuous Mastery. What separates those who learn a skill from those who truly master it? Why do some people reach a certain level of competence and plateau indefinitely, while others continue evolving, their abilities growing more refined and powerful year after year? This question applies to every domain of human performance, but it's particularly relevant to storytelling, an art that can either stagnate or continuously expand throughout your lifetime. The difference lies not in talent or opportunity, but in something far more accessible yet frequently overlooked. It's an approach to skill development that transforms occasional practice into systematic growth, a mindset that views storytelling not as a static technique to be acquired, but as a dynamic capability that evolves through deliberate cultivation. This final dimension of storytelling mastery might seem less immediately applicable than the tactical techniques we've explored in previous chapters. Yet paradoxically, it's the element that ultimately determines whether those techniques become permanent, evolving assets in your communication repertoire or merely temporary tools that fade with time and neglect. The science behind continuous mastery reveals something counterintuitive. The quantity of practice matters far less than its quality. Erickson and Poole's landmark 2016 research demonstrated that deliberate, feedback-rich practice focused on specific improvement areas with immediate assessment accelerates expertise development significantly more than simple accumulation of experience. Put simply, 10 minutes of targeted, reflective practice often yields greater improvement than hours of casual repetition. This finding explains why some people can spend years engaged in an activity without substantial improvement, while others make remarkable progress in months. The difference isn't time invested, but rather the systematic approach to that investment, the deliberate structure that transforms mere repetition into genuine growth. Digital storytelling platforms provide powerful vehicles for this deliberate practice. The 2021 Walking in Their Shoes study showed that immersive digital story interventions raised empathy scores significantly compared to control groups. This research confirms that digital channels aren't merely distribution mechanisms, but powerful development tools that accelerate storytelling mastery through immediate feedback and iterative improvement. You can begin implementing continuous mastery immediately through simple habits that require minimal time, yet yield compounding benefits. The Daily Storybank Review represents one such practice. Each morning, spend just 2 minutes reviewing yesterday's story captures, starring the most promising and archiving those with less potential. Select one captured moment and quickly rewrite it for greater clarity or impact. Then, intentionally share this refined version in a conversation during the day. This brief ritual creates a complete learning cycle: capture, refinement, application, and assessment that gradually transforms your storytelling ability through consistent micro-improvements. Over weeks and months, these small enhancements compound into remarkable growth that casual practitioners never experience. Spontaneity sprints offer another quick start practice that builds narrative agility. Set a timer for 30 seconds and challenge yourself to craft a complete mini story within this tight constraint. Repeat this exercise 5 times in succession, using different story seeds for each sprint. Time yourself precisely using your phone timer and track how your comfort level increases with repetition. This practice develops your ability to generate stories under pressure, a crucial skill for dynamic conversations where opportunities for meaningful narrative emerge unexpectedly. As your comfort with these rapid-fire challenges increases, your storytelling becomes more fluid and adaptable in real-world interactions. The core principles of continuous mastery begin with the deliberate practice loop, a structured approach to improvement that accelerates development far beyond casual practice. Start by setting a specific micro-goal for improvement, such as crafting punchier story hooks or creating more vivid sensory descriptions. This focused target prevents the scattered attention that characterizes ineffective practice. Drill this specific element repeatedly, recording your attempts for objective review. Critically assess your performance, noting both strengths and opportunities for refinement. Then, crucially, seek external feedback within 24 hours while the experience remains fresh. This immediate assessment from trusted peers provides perspectives you might miss in self-evaluation. Spaced repetition represents another fundamental principle of continuous mastery. Rather than cramming all practice into concentrated periods, schedule strategic review sessions at increasing intervals, 1 day later, 1 week later, and 1 month later. This expanding schedule aligns with how memory consolidation naturally occurs, strengthening neural pathways more effectively than massed practice. Consider using a flashcard app to store and review your best story hooks or openings according to this spaced schedule. When you notice certain stories fading in emotional impact or clarity, refresh them with new sensory details or contemporary references. This ongoing renewal keeps your narrative repertoire vibrant and relevant rather than static and dated. The Tactical Toolkit for Continuous Mastery leverages digital channels as powerful development accelerators. Voice notes provide an ideal medium for raw story capture, preserving emotional tone and verbal pacing that might be lost in written documentation. Short-form video, 60 seconds or less, offers a perfect laboratory for testing delivery elements like facial expressions, gestures, and vocal variety. Chat threads with trusted peers create opportunities for rapid A/B testing of different story approaches. Share alternative versions of the same story opening and gather immediate feedback on which creates stronger engagement. This iterative testing accelerates your learning through concrete comparison rather than abstract theory. The reflection cycle technique transforms everyday conversations into structured learning opportunities. After important interactions, quickly jot down 3 bullet points: what landed well, what lagged or missed the mark, and one specific tweak you'll make next time. This brief assessment creates actionable insights from each experience rather than letting valuable lessons dissipate. Monthly, review these reflection notes and color code emerging patterns. You might highlight engagement spikes in green, attention drops in red, and neutral moments in yellow. These visual patterns reveal strengths and growth opportunities that might not be obvious from individual interactions. Based on these trends, set a focused development area for the coming month, perhaps improving story openings if you notice consistent lag in initial engagement. Despite understanding these principles, certain pitfalls can derail your continuous mastery journey. Plateau complacency occurs when you mistake competence for mastery, when good enough becomes the enemy of increasingly excellent. Combat this tendency by periodically reintroducing harder constraints that push you beyond comfortable performance. Challenge yourself with extreme brevity, crafting complete stories in just 20 words, or swap between contrasting genres, transforming a humorous anecdote into a poignant lesson, or vice versa. These deliberate constraints prevent stagnation by forcing creative adaptation that expands your capabilities. Digital clutter represents another common pitfall. Spreading your storytelling practice across too many platforms or tools, diluting focus and fragmenting feedback. Instead, select just 2 core digital channels that align with your specific development goals. Perhaps voice notes for capture and a private social account for delivery practice. This focused approach creates deeper learning than scattered attention across multiple platforms. Schedule quarterly purges of stale or redundant content from your digital story archives. This curation prevents overwhelm and ensures your collection remains vibrant and useful rather than becoming a digital hoarding ground that discourages active engagement. To implement continuous mastery immediately, try the Storybank review exercise. Select 5 stories from your collection and rate each on 3 dimensions: clarity, emotional impact, and practical usefulness. This assessment helps identify which stories deserve further refinement and which might be archived to make space for fresh material. The spontaneity sprint exercise builds your improvisational storytelling muscles. Set a timer and craft 5 rapid anecdotes about everyday objects in your immediate environment. Challenge yourself to complete each mini-story within 30 seconds, focusing on creating a clear beginning, middle, and end despite the tight constraint. This practice develops the narrative agility that serves you in dynamic, unpredictable conversations. Finally, the reflection loop exercise transforms casual conversations into deliberate practice opportunities. After your next 3 important interactions, take 30 seconds to note what worked well, what could improve, and one specific change you'll implement next time. This brief reflection converts everyday experiences into structured learning that compounds over time. The true power of continuous mastery emerges not from any single practice, but from the integrated system these approaches create, a self-reinforcing cycle of capture, refinement, application, assessment, and adaptation that transforms storytelling from an occasional technique into a defining characteristic of how you communicate in every context. This systematic approach yields benefits that extend far beyond improved narratives. As your storytelling abilities evolve through deliberate practice, you'll notice transformations in seemingly unrelated areas: increased confidence in unfamiliar social situations, greater resilience during challenging conversations, enhanced ability to build rapport with diverse personalities, and deeper satisfaction in both personal and professional relationships. Perhaps most significantly, continuous mastery creates a virtuous cycle where improvement generates motivation, which fuels further practice, leading to greater improvement. This self-reinforcing loop transforms storytelling development from something that requires willpower into something that generates its own momentum, a joyful exploration rather than a disciplined obligation. The ultimate reward of this journey isn't just becoming a better storyteller, it's becoming a more connected human being. As your narratives grow more authentic, nuanced, and attuned to others, your relationships naturally deepen. Conversations transform from mere information exchanges into meaningful connections. Differences in perspective become bridges to understanding rather than barriers to communication. In a world increasingly fragmented by technology, ideology, and competing demands for attention, the ability to create genuine human connection through story becomes not just a valuable skill, but a vital contribution. Your evolving mastery of storytelling serves not only your personal and professional goals, but the broader human need for authentic connection in an often disconnected world. This is the true promise of storytelling mastery, not merely to speak more effectively, but to listen more deeply, not just to influence others, but to understand them, not simply to share experiences, but to create them together. Through the continuous development of your narrative abilities, you become not just a better communicator, but a more empathetic, insightful, and connected human being. The journey you've begun through these chapters isn't ending, it's just beginning. The principles, techniques, and practices we've explored are not destinations but doorways, opening to a lifelong path of discovery and growth. Each conversation becomes an opportunity to learn, each interaction a chance to refine your abilities, each relationship a context for deeper connection through the stories you share. The question now isn't whether you've learned enough, but rather, what story will you tell next? And how will that story, crafted with intention, delivered with presence, received with attention, create a moment of genuine human connection in a world that desperately needs it? Yet even the most captivating stories can fall flat if your words lack precision and clarity. Have you ever crafted the perfect narrative only to stumble when delivering it, searching for the right expressions while momentum slips away? The missing element that transforms good storytellers into truly influential communicators lies in the fundamental building blocks of expression themselves. To truly master the art of connection through story, you'll need to discover how to harness the full potential of your words in the audiobook Words Are Power: How to Be Articulate. Tap the center of the video now to continue your transformation journey.